Hello, beautiful friends. It's so nice to have you back in my little tiny corner of the internet. I hope this video finds you super well and that you are having a week just as fabulous as you are because you freaking deserve it. If you are new here and you have never seen this face before, then hi, my name is Liz. And if you are into things like true crime and unsolved mysteries, then you should probably just hit subscribe and we can be best friends forever. You know, if that's something you feel like you might want in your life. But just so you know, we're best friends now. Speaking of subscribing, I just wanted to say a big welcome to the bunch of you that have subscribed recently and joined this big best friendship we have going on here. And also just a massive thank you to all of you that have left me just so much love in the comments in the last few weeks. You guys seriously have no idea how much you all mean to me. I love being able to chat with you and connect with you, and your comments literally just make my entire days. So thank you so much for all of your wonderful support. But we all know who you really came here to see today, the magnificent Lily girl, here to give us just top-notch emotional support where it's needed and plenty of visual and audio disturbances where they are definitely not needed, but I guess appreciated, maybe? I don't know. Editing Liz, let's switch to Lily Cam. Oh, really? You're saying hi to everyone. You are so friendly. Good girl. Are these too noisy? I don't know why I wore these earrings today. I'm sorry if you can hear them. So now let's dive on into today's hectic, crazy, insane case, commonly referred to as the fortune teller murders. And if that name doesn't clue you in, it's going to be one wild ride. Today we are traveling to Orange County, California, where on the 22nd of April 2005, police arrived at a house in Little Saigon in an area called Westminster. The Westminster police had been dispatched to this house because someone had made a phone call to 911 saying that they were concerned because despite multiple attempts they had made that day, they had been unable to get into contact with the residents, 52-year-old Ha Jade Smith and her 23-year-old daughter, Anita Nhi Vo. Seeing as it had only been one day, I imagine police thought this caller was overreacting. They probably weren't expecting anything terribly dramatic when they went to do a welfare check. They probably thought maybe Ha and Anita had lost their phones, or maybe their internet was down. You know, these things happen. And when police got there and knocked on the door, no one answered, but there was nothing out of place or suspicious, no signs of forced entry or anything like that. So they were about to leave, and then one of them looked inside one of the windows and realized that this caller's instincts had been 100% on point, and there was something very wrong. So they quickly gained access to the house and found themselves in the middle of a very grisly scene. 52-year-old Ha was laying face down in the kitchen in a pool of her own blood, having been stabbed multiple times in the face, neck, and shoulders. And her 23-year-old daughter, Anita, her body was found laying on the laundry floor with her head just jutting out into the hallway, having suffered a similar fate to Ha, with multiple stab wounds to her face and neck. Both women also had multiple defensive stab wounds to their hands, showing that they had both desperately fought for their lives during this vicious attack. The house itself had been ransacked and left in absolute chaos. There were drawers that had been ripped out and emptied, furniture had been tipped over, and there were papers scattered everywhere, as if someone had been urgently looking for something. But again, there were no signs of forced entry. The doors had been locked when police arrived. The windows all had bars on them that were left in place and untampered with. So it was highly unlikely that this was just some robbery gone wrong. It seemed instead that Ha and Anita had known whoever killed them and had unwittingly and voluntarily let them inside the house. Now, when they had burst inside the house, police had been caught quite off guard by some of these strange esoteric items inside. There were altars set up around the rooms, complete with charms, incense, and candles. There were tarot cards, and multiple otherworldly trinkets that hinted at ritualism and magic. But what really unsettled police and left them in just a total state of confusion was one final detail regarding the way the bodies had been left. And it was this detail that left them convinced that there was a much darker narrative behind the horrific murders of these two women. Because after Ha and Anita had been so brutally murdered, someone had poured nearly a gallon of white paint over their faces and hands. And this was something that police had never seen before. And frankly, they didn't have the first clue what to make of it. Detective Tim Vu later said in an interview that they had calls from police departments literally across the state saying like, what the hell? Because it was just so bizarre. So it's definitely safe to say the Westminster police probably felt a little bit out of depth and unsure of how to approach this case. Now, before we get into the investigation, let's talk a little bit about who Ha and Anita were. Ha was a Vietnamese refugee who made her home in Little Saigon in Orange County a good few decades before the murders. While she was alive, Ha had been, of all things, a fortune teller, and a very well-known and respected one at that. She was known as Miss Ha to her clients in Little Saigon, and although there were a good many fortune tellers in the area, it was no secret that Ha was the best at what she did. If you were lusting after someone and wanted them to fall deeply, madly, head over heels in love with you, you went to Ha and asked her to cast a love spell on them. If you wanted to know if your significant other was cheating, you went to Ha so that she could use her psychic powers to catch them out. You wanted to know the best date to open a new business, get married, have a baby. You went to Ha and she would tell you. Ha's fortune-telling abilities were so well-renowned that people literally traveled across the country from as far as New York to acquire her spells and advice. But Ha couldn't do all of these things from just the goodness of her heart. She needed to survive. She needed to make a living. So there was, of course, a cost for her services. A cost that would range from, just a casual $6,000 to up to $15,000 per visit. And you may be sitting there like, why? Why on God's green earth did these people pay her so much money to look into a crystal ball and pretend to know their future? But before they had died, Ha and Anita had made up part of the roughly 30,000 strong community of Vietnamese Americans living in the area. And this community, as a very general rule, were really invested in things like astrology, the Chinese zodiac, shamans, the existence of spirits, both good and evil, and of course, fortune telling. And this goes beyond just, some silly superstitions. This stems from Vietnam's very rich culture and beliefs passed down from generation to generation. To this very day, fortune telling is still a very honored and respected part of Vietnamese tradition. So with this amazing reputation that Ha had worked so hard to build up over the years, people wouldn't bat an eye at spending thousands of dollars on her services for her to tell them where they should go on vacation that year, or even who they should or shouldn't marry. Ha's initial wish when getting into the fortune-telling field was just to give her daughter Anita a stable life and to make sure she had everything she ever needed. But once Ha gained her footing and obtained a vast and loyal client base, she realized that she could afford to enjoy the finer things in life. So Ha drove a flashy Mercedes-Benz. She was a regular in the pricey jewelry stores that were spotted throughout Little Saigon, and she was always draped in expensive necklaces and bracelets and earrings that just glittered with diamonds and other precious stones. It was said that Ha just left this jewelry lying around the house in clear view of the clients that would come to see her, and some might say this was a little bit showy or trashy, I guess, but I think it was a genius marketing move on her part. I mean, what kind of person wouldn't want to invest thousands of dollars into spells and fortune readings from this woman who had quite clearly used her formidable psychic prowess to get all of that shiny bling? Genius. But this perceived showiness did cost her dearly about 4 years before the murders in 2001, when Ha was tied up and robbed of nearly $400,000 worth of cash and jewelry she had lying around the house. So after this, she was a little bit more careful. She changed the locks on the doors, she put up the bars on the windows that I mentioned earlier, and while she did still have a large amount of cash because most of her clients would pay her in cash, she hid the money and all of her jewelry in safe spots around the house. Ha's daughter Anita was attending college at the time of her death, and while she herself didn't partake in any of her mother's psychic services, she was fully supportive and was well used to Ha's clients frequently visiting the house. Back to the investigation, taking into account the white paint on the victims' faces and hands and the spiritual nature of numerous items in the house, it was suspected from early on that there may have been some kind of ritualistic or superstitious element to the killings. In fact, a lot of the tips that police received from the public were from other fortune tellers, as well as witches and Wiccans, wanting to help by sharing their opinion on the significance of the white paint. During their investigation, police learned things like in Vietnam, the traditional colour worn to funerals is not black but white, because in Vietnamese culture, white is a symbol of mourning and rites of passage. Also in traditional Vietnamese theatre, the actors would paint their faces white when they performed. A theory was formed that whoever had killed Ha and Anita had covered their faces in white paint because they believed this would prevent their souls from being able to reconnect with their bodies after death, because the paint would prevent them from recognizing their own faces. Another theory, though, was that the white paint had just been a red herring added to hint at cultural significance that wasn't actually present. Or maybe the white paint had just been a bizarre attempt by the killer or killers to cover up evidence and evade capture. At the crime scene, though, scrolling through Ha's appointment book, police discovered a lead. On the 21st of April, the day of the murders, Ha had a booking for a fortune reading with a woman named Tanya Nelson, and after just a little bit of digging, police discovered a paper trail that had Tanya Nelson's name all over it. So it turns out Ha's credit cards had been used for multiple purchases after she had been murdered, amounting to roughly $3,000. There were purchases for luxury clothing, for expensive meals and electronics, and also 2 plane tickets from Orange County to North Carolina, the state that Tanya lived in. So police went to Tanya's home in North Carolina to say, hey, what's up? But they found she wasn't there. What they did find, though, was Tanya's day planner. And on the 21st of April, the day of the murders, there was an entry penciled in reading, "Horrible sin." Oh, Tanya. With all of this evidence mounting up against Tanya, police were, of course, determined to track her down very quickly. And Tanya, yet again, made this extremely easy for them when she handed over Ha's credit card to purchase yet another plane ticket, this time from North Carolina back to Orange County, where she was planning another shopping spree. Like, Tanya, what are you even thinking? So on the 30th of May, Tanya was arrested outside the hotel room she was staying in Santa Ana that, you guessed it, she paid for using Ha's credit card. And by now, police had gathered up a lot of surveillance footage, clearly showing Tanya making all of these purchases and happily handing over Ha's credit card every time. But despite making this an incredibly straightforward investigation for police and having Ha and Anita's credit cards, their identification, their luxury luggage in her possession at the time of her arrest, Tanya swore she was innocent and that she didn't even know that Ha and Anita had died and that she had no idea why police were arresting her. Crazy, right, Lily? I mean, can you believe that? What was she thinking, Lily? So remember how I said that there were 2 plane tickets purchased from Orange County to North Carolina? Well, one of them was in Tanya's name and the other was in the name of a man named Philippe Zamora. And police managed to track Philippe down to his house in North Carolina, where he was arrested on the 1st of June, the day after Tanya. And Philippe just immediately confessed to everything, telling them that Tanya had roped him into coming along to Orange County to help murder these two women, and that the whole thing had been her idea. So police now knew who had killed Ha and Anita. They just didn't know why. But let's talk a little bit about Tanya Nelson. Tanya, at the time of the murders, lived in North Carolina, but she had grown up in Orange County as the youngest of 16 children in a wealthy family living in Little Saigon in Westminster, the same area that Ha and Anita had lived. Tanya's family had immigrated from Vietnam in 1979, and the entire family, including Tanya herself, had hired Ha for her psychic abilities many times over the years. In 1998, Tanya had opened a lingerie store in Orange County, but it had not done well at all. And due to the business failing, as well as about $200,000 worth of credit card and personal loan debt, she and her husband had to file for bankruptcy in 2000. Now, Tanya had an interesting relationship with her husband in that there wasn't much of one. There wasn't exactly romance in the air when it came to these two, but when it came to Tanya and her husband's brother, George, boy, was it a different story. For the best part of a decade, Tanya had an on-again, off-again relationship with George, all without her husband knowing, of course. In 2004, Tanya had gone to Ha to ask for her advice when it came to her failed business. She was determined to make this lingerie business work despite the bankruptcy. So Ha tapped into her psychic powers and told Tanya that if she were to move her business outside of Orange County to, say, North Carolina, she would be rewarded with great success and fortune. It's been said that Tanya was one of Ha's more demanding clients, and I feel like Ha giving Tanya this advice to move to North Carolina kind of already hints that there was some kind of discontent happening between them. I mean, she's literally sending her to the other side of the country. I don't know how much more clearly you can say, I don't like you. Please go far away from me. So Tanya enthusiastically took Ha's advice and packed up her life, moved across the country to North Carolina, and opened a new lingerie store in Roanoke Rapids. And George moved with her as well, sort of, from Orange County to Georgia. So Tanya had a new business. Her toy boy was clearly so in love with her that he followed her across the country. Things were really looking up, but it wasn't long before they started to take a downhill turn because George was feeling very unsatisfied in the relationship. He realized it wasn't going anywhere. Tanya was his sister-in-law after all, so he called it quits. And Tanya was furious. George had gone and gotten himself a new girlfriend and even had the nerve to propose to her. At this point, Tanya sought the services of Ha again, this time via letter, asking her to place a love spell on George so that he would break up with this floozy and wake up and realize that they were meant to be together. But Ha said no. She replied to Tanya's letter basically explaining that she couldn't change reality, that Tanya needed to suck it up, realize that there was no future with George, and move on with her life. You know, basically everything that Tanya absolutely did not want to hear. So Tanya was like, fine, I don't need your help. I'll sort this out on my own. So she told George that she was going to kidnap his fiancée, cut off her fingers, and mail them to him. She graffitied vulgar, taunting phrases on this poor woman's house and even broke in at one point and stole a photo of George. But you might be surprised to hear that none of this really delightful behavior worked, and George stayed with his fiancée and they eventually got married. But Tanya wasn't done. She hired a private detective to track George's new wife's every move and even tried to commission her own son to kill this woman. And when he refused, she took his gun and used it to beat this poor woman during an aggravated assault in December 2004. In the meantime, with Tanya so distracted with trying to win George back, her lingerie shop was seriously failing. But that couldn't be right because Ha had promised her that if she moved her business to North Carolina, she would be rewarded with great success and fortune. But the business did end up going bankrupt, and Tanya ended up losing not just the love of her life, George, but also her house. But Tanya knew none of this was her fault. It was Ha's fault. Ha, who had had the audacity to refuse to cast a love spell on George and had given her bad business advice that resulted in her losing everything. And for these sins, Tanya decided that Ha was going to pay. Hi. Hello. Thank you. So Tanya approached Philippe Zamora, a 55-year-old machine operator also living in North Carolina, and promised to set up meetings for him with potential gay lovers if he would just come to Orange County with her and help her murder Ha. Philippe was already familiar with Ha because his wife was a client of hers. I'm not sure what the relationship was between Tanya and Philippe because he was married, but she knew he was secretly gay. So I don't know what was happening there. But anyway, Tanya asked for Philippe to help her murder Ha, and Philippe was like, yeah, no worries. So the two traveled across the country to Orange County, and as we've established, Tanya had a booking for a fortune reading with Ha, but Ha may not have known that Philippe was going to be with her because only Tanya's name was written in her planner. But Tanya and Philippe turned up at Ha and Anita's house on the 21st of April for the booking, and according to Philippe, it wasn't long after they arrived that Tanya suddenly leapt up, went to the kitchen and grabbed a knife and started stabbing Anita. When Ha started screaming, Tanya yelled at Philippe to kill her, to not let her scream. So Philippe panicked. He grabbed a wine bottle and hit her over the shoulder, and then grabbed 2 knives from the kitchen and stabbed her over 10 times. After the attack, while Ha was laying in the kitchen and Anita was laying in the laundry, both of them just slowly bleeding to death, Tanya and Philippe grabbed the bloody knives and attempted to wash them in the kitchen sink and then wrapped them in plastic bags. And they then got to work ransacking the place. They stole Ha and Anita's credit cards, jewelry, phones, and other valuables, but they actually missed a huge stash. We're talking about $500,000 worth of cash and jewelry that Ha had hidden in her vacuum cleaner and her coffee maker. After this, Tanya and Philippe drove to Walmart to buy the white paint and then returned to their house and poured it all over Ha and Anita's faces and hands. Tanya then used Ha's credit card to purchase plane tickets for her and Philippe back to North Carolina for the following day. And all of this is as told by Philippe, by the way, because despite the mountain of evidence against her, to this day, Tanya still professes her innocence. Philippe, on the other hand, pled guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and agreed to testify against Tanya in court, in doing so avoiding the death penalty and instead receiving a sentence of 27 years in prison. In January 2010, when Tanya's trial began, she pled not guilty, of course, and Philippe testified against her for 2 days through a Vietnamese interpreter because he was unable to speak English. Philippe testified that Tanya had wanted Ha dead because her fortune reading about Tanya's business didn't come true, and he said that he had agreed to come along and help because of that promise Tanya had made to him to introduce him to gay lovers in Orange County. When asked about Anita, Philippe said that Tanya had wanted her dead as well because she felt she had cheated and deceived her just like her mother. Tanya's defense team argued that Philippe was lying, that he had made this whole story up to implicate Tanya as the mastermind and avoid the death penalty. And in actuality, Tanya wasn't even present at the time of the murders. This argument was based around the fact that while Philippe's DNA had been found on 2 of the knife handles, there was 0 DNA evidence found linking Tanya to the crime scene. But the prosecution pointed out that this was because, according to Philippe's testimony, Tanya had worn 2 pairs of gloves during the murders. 2 pairs. I feel like this detail tells us all we need to know about Tanya. Like, she had 2 pairs of gloves, and rather than giving a pair to her partner in crime to wear, she wears both of them. Like, what planet are you even from, Tanya? So the jury deliberated for about 1 day before coming back and finding Tanya guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder, plus several special circumstances, including multiple victims, murder by lying in wait, and murder while carrying out a robbery. And it was these special circumstances that led to Tanya being sentenced to death on the 23rd of April 2010, becoming the second woman to ever be placed on death row in Orange County's history. Fast forward to over 10 years later, and Tanya is still awaiting execution, serving out her sentence at the Central California's Women Facility. In March 2019, an executive order was issued for the halt of all executions in the state of California. So while Tanya's fortune has changed for the better a little bit, this order expires in 2023. So we will see how things pan out for her after that. But now that we are all caught up on the fortune teller murders case, let's finish up with some final thoughts. This case, I feel like a lot of the cases I cover are tragic and infuriating, but this one, it took me a while to place my finger on it, but I think it's that the whole thing just reeks of entitlement on Tanya's part, does it not? She had been paying for Ha's services for about 10 years, and it's like once she realized Ha couldn't fix her own stupid mistakes, Tanya was like, hold up, I have handed over thousands of dollars to you over all these years, and you're telling me you can't make my husband's brother love me? That you can't fix the business I abandoned while I was busy stalking him and his new wife? And for this, she decided that Ha deserved to die. Like, how delusional and irresponsible for your own life choices do you have to be to think that way? And I don't know if there was more to the story that I just couldn't find, but I really don't understand the motive behind killing Anita. I can only speculate that maybe Tanya was that irrationally angry at Ha that her anger spilled over to Anita. Or maybe she thought it wasn't enough of a punishment for Ha to die, her daughter had to die as well. Or maybe she didn't want to leave behind a witness. But if that is the case, I would just really love to know how Tanya thought this was all going to pan out, like what was going on in that disturbed mind of hers. She made an appointment with Ha on the day that she planned to kill her. In her own planner on that day, she wrote horrible sin. And after the murder, she just brazenly made it rain with Ha's credit cards. I just really want to know what was going on up there for her to think, this is fine. No one will ever connect these dots. And having the gall to go back to Orange County for a shopping spree after the murders, like the mind boggles. It's just so scary to think that someone can think this way and honestly think that they're going to get away with murder. But I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this case and discuss it with you further. So hit me up in the comments below. And if you haven't already, remember to hit subscribe so that we can be best friends forever and hang out some more. Lily, would you like to come say bye? You here to say bye? They're just there. Just there. Yeah. They're just there. That's the mic. What are you doing? Just going for my lights, just getting all up in the production, aren't you? Thank you so much for hanging out with me and Lily. We appreciate it as always. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you have a wonderful week. And me and Lily will be counting down the hours until we see you in the next one. Bye. But I have to stay afloat. It's not easy